Hello, my name is Xander Weaver-Scull. I'm a Bay Area artist, born and raised, grew up out in West Marin, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my artwork and my process and why I do what I do. So here it goes. I am passionate about creating non-didactic, inspiring artwork of threatened, endangered, and recovered species that do not have the ability to speak on their own behalf. Nearly 1 in 5 species of reptiles, 1 in 4 mammals, and 1 in 3 amphibians are currently threatened with extinction. Through the use of hand-drawn and cut stencils, watercolor, homemade inks from natural pigments, I bring attention to the impact humans are having on the Earth's other inhabitants. In a world where fear and apocalyptic framing are widely used to influence people, I create work that is positive and presents the issue in a non-confrontational manner. This artwork is a way for me to honor living beings that have been harmed by human actions and to craft something that is both beautiful and healing. I try not to tell my viewers what to think, rather create a moment for reflection and appreciation. Creating each piece is a slow process, from the research to the initial drawing to cutting out the stencil and hand painting it onto paper. This time gives me the opportunity to hang out with my subject, to truly witness it from a state of awe, attempt to see all its intricate majesty, look into its eyes, and think about its life's joys and sorrows. Making this work is a way for me to personally honor each species and make something that can be appreciated both aesthetically and intellectually. For me, as particularly growing up in West Marin, for me that means growing up with apple trees and able to go hiking right from my back door, to looking for salamanders and scorpions when I was a kid. I've always had a deep appreciation for animals and the natural world, was raised to see the world that way, and it's part of my process is trying to show that excitement and that sense of wonder and awe that I get to experience, that I personally experience when seeing these amazing creatures. Not more than 2 weeks ago, there was a family of red foxes living behind my home, mother and 4 kits, and they're extremely adorable, and just how lucky I feel I am to get to witness that. I want to do my best to share a little bit of the feeling and excitement that wells up for me when I get to experience spending a little bit of time with amazing animals that we don't get to really see too often. I create my stencils out of sheets of acetate on which I freehand draw out my image using colored markers, starting with light hues and steadily using darker tones to define greater detail. I often use several photo references to create my drawing when possible. Once my drawing is complete, I use an X-Acto knife to cut out the pieces from my stencil. To date, my largest stencil has more than 1,500 pieces cut out of it. Once the stencil is complete, I place it down on printmaking paper and hand paint through the stencil onto the page. What I have right here is a stencil placed down on a white sheet of Stonehenge paper, and so you can see the stencil material is this clear thin acetate that I've hand cut out with an X-Acto knife and used Sharpies. And what I'm going to be doing is placing it down on the paper, and under the paper, as you can see to the side, is this board that's black. It's metallic, and I can place magnets onto it, which, as you can see, they are magnetic, will hold onto the paper and keep the stencil in place as I go through the process of actually using watercolor and homemade inks to hand paint through the stencil onto the white sheet of paper. And the reason I use this printmaking paper is that the difference between printmaking paper and watercolor paper is that watercolor paper is designed, it has what's called sizing. It's kind of what is a little bit of the glue element that holds all the paper together on the surface so that the water will stay on the surface for as long as possible so you can move and manipulate it. However, printmaking paper has the sizing within. So it's designed to be much better at absorbing liquids and things than watercolor paper, and I'm wanting the inks and watercolors to be absorbed as quickly as possible so they don't eventually like get underneath the stencil and blur and blotch. Okay, so I just finished hand painting on the stencil. As you can see, the stencil is laid out on a sheet of paper. The stencil is this clear acetate, and all around here are all these black magnets because I have a board painted with metallic paint, so the surface I'm working on is magnetic. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up all the magnets I've got on here. And this right here is a Lake Erie water snake. It was once an endangered species, or at least threatened species, but has since recovered. So now I'm going to peel back the stencil and see how it turned out. Very cool. There's still a little dirt and watercolor, it's a little crusty. Well, looks great. Yeah, a little cleanup to do and might darken up some areas, but other than that, get to move on and start doing some background shading before doing multiple layers. So what we've got going on here is got the stencil already applied. It has another clear acetate stencil over it protecting it, so all the white spaces between all the pieces within the stencil will remain white while the whole background will then receive the color. And then over here, as you can see a little bit, there's more stencils of a similar nature that are blocking out so that this whole area will remain white, but the outline of the snakes will create a converse image. Right here I've got some ink. It's a mixture of watercolor and some homemade earth inks made out of dirt water, maple syrup, kind of a little mix of the two, with a pretty cool atomizer device that will allow me to spray things. Because I've had a little, not the best time with airbrushes. So we'll see how this goes. And as I do it, I'm trying to keep it all spread out so not one area gets too kind of moisturized and saturated, because the paper will start to ripple and warp. Ideally too, I'm thinking of having the top of the page lighter with a little bit more weight and darkness down lower, but I'll kind of have to see that over time. And with something like this too, I might have enough space to be able to move back and forth and while it dries, but I also need to let the whole thing dry for a bit and do a second coating. Otherwise the water droplets can start to build up and will start joining together and creating larger splotches of color, which can be a cool effect, but I'm not sure if that's what I want to go with. Okay, changing angles here to give you an opportunity to see a little bit more clearly, since I think on the previous video the spray ink that I'm spraying really didn't show up too well, just because it's so just the angle and how light the ink is. But yeah, here's my tool that I'm blowing through to spray ink out onto the paper. So here's the piece after I've finished spraying multiple layers on, because I don't think it showed up all that well in the video when I was doing the spraying, but you can see the textured speckled background effect that occurs from using the atomizer. And moving over here, so this is where elements were blocked out, and you can see how the snakes appear, and then here's the white area where the text will be digitally added to my book. And here's a nice close-up of some of that speckle. And it produces a really nice effect and makes that snake pop. There we go. So now here we have the finished piece. As you can see, it has the multiples as well as the cleanly blocked out image. And now zoomed in closer. Each stencil I create, I see as a simplified version of the Earth's ecosystem, like a puzzle comprised of distinctive pieces. Alone, each piece is unique, but essentially meaningless without the other pieces to complete the whole. You will see in this little video I've created a whole stencil and how all the pieces are together, and slowly, as you start to remove 1, 2, 3 pieces from the whole picture, it's still recognizable the same way if you start removing species from an ecosystem. It's still understandable and functions as a whole. However, you get to a certain point and remove one too many of the pieces, and like an ecosystem, the imagery that the stencil creates eventually breaks down, and it just becomes meaningless pieces that are no longer supported by each other to create a whole unified ecosystem. Each stencil I create, I see as a simplified version of the Earth's ecosystem, like a puzzle comprised of distinctive pieces. Alone, each piece is unique, but essentially meaningless without the other pieces to complete the whole. Each stencil I create, I see as a simplified version of the Earth's ecosystem, like a puzzle comprised of distinctive pieces. Alone, each piece is unique, but essentially meaningless without the other pieces to complete the whole.